session, Dr. D.C. Dole, sir, who is Director Medical Oncology and Chief of Day Services at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute, Delhi, and sir has been my teacher, mentor, Dr. Ramesh Polo specialty.
We hardly had any drugs, and it was really supposed to be a really malignant disorder with no lifespan, no life expectancy. We used to have, in my times, we used to have 5 and antiamycin. Then we did some studies on gemcitabine. So a few years ago, we had only 3-4 drugs, but now, in the last 2-3 years, there are lots of changes that have taken in the treatment of hepatocellular carcinoma. And I'm glad that Dr. Bharat Bhosle, who is a senior consultant medical oncologist at Bombay, he will be talking to us about the management of treatment in hepatocellular carcinoma, whether we use TKIs or immunotherapy or combination, how best we use these drugs in the present scenario in
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the introduction. So, without wasting time, because we have limits of time and we will try to finish it on time. So, I will be talking on the management aspect in the first line, where no TKI have been the standard of care, and now there is a lot of movement is going on in the field of immuno-oncology. So, this is the spectrum, as Dole sir was saying. They have seen an era where there was no drug, only the combination of chemotherapy and survival of hepatocellular carcinoma unresectable in a palliative setting was very dismal. Even the median survival was less than 3 months or 3 months, hardly. And then in 2007, the first movement happened in the field of palliating these hepatocellular carcinoma patients, where the trials sorafenib came, and subsequently we know that lenvatinib, regorafenib in second line, and there are a couple of molecules including cabozantinib, ramucirumab have come up. And now you can see in the last 3-4 years, we have plenty of plethora of molecules in immuno-oncology drugs have been added to HCC. But it is very important to choose these drugs, because we have experiencing sorafenib. It's a wonderful drug, and we'll review the literature. It is very important to go into the history of the disease and treatment while choosing an agent. That gives us idea. So we know that pathogenesis of HCC is very complex. There are downstream signaling happening from the tyrosine kinases, and VEGF is one of the important pathways. So if you look at the targeted tyrosine kinase receptors, in the first line, the approved agents in the TKI, sorafenib, lenvatinib, and there are multiple receptor tyrosine kinases are involved here. And you can see in the slide, so these are multi-kinase inhibitors have been the backbone of the therapy for hepatocellular carcinoma. So I would like to preview the published trial of the sorafenib, wherein based on the 2 phase 3 trials, SHARP and SF-ACIFIC. Both are phase 3 trials, and based on this, the molecule came into four-line usage with level 1 evidence. So if you look at the trial population, but the only difference in SHARP and SF-ACIFIC is that SF-ACIFIC involved more advanced disease. If you look at the HBV percentage also, it is different. In SHARP, it was around 20% versus it was nearly 80% in Asia-Pacific. So if you look at the median overall survival with the sorafenib was 10.7 months, 11 months nearly, and it was around 6.5 months with the Asia-Pacific. So that shows that the disease was very much advanced in the Asia-Pacific. Based on this trials, this came into use as a first-line agent. And it has worked across all subgroups, but if you specifically look in pooled analysis of both the trials, lack of extrahepatic spread, HCV positivity, and lower neutrophil lymphocyte ratio were predictive of a greater overall survival. So if you particularly look at this particular thing, you will get a more advantage by using sorafenib. Why it is important? In spite of we are in the era of immunotherapy and combination of targeted agents, sorafenib remains our choice of agent, and we'll review that in some insights. So coming to the side effects, so everybody is aware about the sorafenib side effect. I need not go into detail. So stating the fact that it is associated with a lot of side effects, but it is very important to tune the dose of the drug and to maintain the drug so that the efficacy comes with the continuation of the drug without dropping the drug. And everybody knows that there are a lot of side effects with the sorafenib. So there was a try to use the local therapies, which we have been used as we have been using as a bridge to transplant or resection. So local regional therapy like embolization or intra-arterial therapies, these have been used in localized diseases. And there have been trials by adding these drugs, sorafenib with these local therapies. But apart from only TACTIS, rest all trials failed. So for the listener, it is very important, especially for the students, in the palliative setting, while choosing these local therapies, you have to be very clear your aim is not to improve the survival, because none of the trial had shown by combination of these local therapies with sorafenib has improved the survival. Yes, for palliation and symptom relief, these trials have helped. So what apart from trial happened? So this is the real world data apart from the clinical trial. Because if you look at the sorafenib trial, only the childhood age patients were included. And here in the real world data, you can see this has been used in childhood A, B, C. You can see the childhood C, the fetal survival to 6 months. But in childhood B, if you carefully select the patient, you can get the survival advantage. But in childhood A, you can see the 13.6 months, childhood B was 5.2 months. And if you look at the NCCN guidelines, the only agent which is approved to a certain extent in childhood B is sorafenib. So this is again no adverse effect profile. I will not go. So it is well tolerated in the real world scenario also. This is the Optimus data where the patients were referred for the local regional therapies, and if the patient is not eligible for intra-arterial therapies, the patient was referred for starting the systemic therapy. Based on when the sorafenib started, early or late, you can see those patients who immediately started on sorafenib, again in the real world data out of the clinical scenario, the survival was better. It was 16.2 months against those patients who deferred starting the sorafenib. You can see 12.1 months is the median overall survival. So sorafenib we have been using more than a decade. We have experience how to handle the side effects. So still in today's date, in spite that there are combination of therapies or immuno-oncology or targeted therapies, this is one of the preferred agent. And one more important thing is the cost. So another agent is lenvatinib. Again, one of the agent which is acting on the tyrosine kinase VEGF receptors. Apart from the other receptors where it acts, I have enlisted the list. So this is the trial, Reflect. It was again a phase 3 trial. It was an open label trial, non-inferiority trial. Based on this, 1:1 randomization, this is the overall survival. So the endpoint was met and lenvatinib was non-inferior to sorafenib. Median overall survival of lenvatinib was 13.6 months versus 12.3 months for sorafenib. So problem is that we have so many agents tested after sorafenib, but none of the agents have been tested after progression of lenvatinib. So this is the second agent which is available in the first line. So again, the PFS looks numerically better. Both are because it's a non-inferiority trial. Looking at the side effect profile, this is the agent where the side effect profile is little bit different from the sorafenib. In sorafenib, we know that hand syndrome is a problem. If you look at lenvatinib, tension and proteinuria was the problem. So monitoring these side effects is very important when you think of putting the patients on lenvatinib. So lenvatinib was non-inferior. Again, I mentioned it was an open label trial. Usually we prefer the double blind trial, which is standard. So carefully, if you look at the inclusion criteria, patients with more than 50% of liver occupation and bile duct and portal invasion, they are excluded. So here again, they have selected carefully those patients with a good outcome. Unlike the sorafenib, regorafenib, as I mentioned, there is a sequencing. Most of the trials have been tested after sorafenib. Again, we don't have a real world data of what to use after lenvatinib. So again, these points needs to be, and if you look at the resource data where regorafenib is used after sorafenib, if you look at the overall survival in the tune of 26 months, and if you look at the updated data of lenvatinib, it is around 21 months. So these are some points which I would like to highlight. And these are all the trials where sharp SAFS reflects. You can look at the median overall survival. So after this TKIs, a lot has been tried, but now in last 3-4 years, there are agents coming up in the trial of immuno-oncology in the second line, and the digit monoclonal antibodies like ramucirumab. So nivolumab and pembrolizumab have respectively been tried in Checkmate 04, and pembrolizumab was tried in Keynote 240. And based on this, these agents are approved in second line. Then they tried to bring the immune checkpoint inhibitors in the first line. I will not go into details of the mechanism of action as everybody is aware about how the IO acts. So this is the first phase 3 study of a IO drug, Checkmate 459, where it has been directly compared with the TKI. So this is the randomization, and the primary endpoint was the overall survival. There was a lot of hope from this trial, and you can look at 12 months the percentage of survival is 55% in the TKI and 60% in the nivolumab. And at 2 years, almost 40% of the patients are alive as opposed to 30% in the TKI. Same thing, but the end point was not met. The statistical value which was designed was not met. But what was important in this, irrespective of the PDL1, if somebody wished to use nivolumab in the first line, there is no need to do PDL1. Irrespective of the PDL1, it has shown the survival. What is here? The quality of life, the side effect profile, if you look, it is very well tolerated drug. So if somebody wish to avoid, you definitely have an agent, but there is no level 1 evidence. Here again, you have fact sheets. The quality of life is much better in nivolumab as compared to sorafenib. This is first line drug. So based on this, obviously there is no level 1 evidence being a superiority trial. So this drug has been mentioned in NCCN as a category 2B. If somebody wish to avoid all those level 1 evidence drugs, you can use, but with the lower level of evidence. So after failing to show the superiority of immuno-oncology drugs as a monotherapy, a lot has been happened by using the IO drug. Second line, these combinations have been tried, and with the positive results, they are trying to bring this combination into upfront. IO plus targeted therapy is also trials are going on, and one trial is positive, and the drug has come already into the first line use. IO and other is use of radiation, like other diseases. Everybody knows that we are trying to combine the radiation or chemotherapy along with the IO drugs. So what is happening over here? So atezolizumab plus bevacizumab. So this is the IMPROVE 150. It is again the first phase 3 trial, successful trial of combining the IO drug with bevacizumab versus sorafenib in the first line. So the randomization was 2:1. Carefully selected patients. You can see the inclusion criteria. Patients with bleeding or high risk of bleeding were excluded. Now in hepatocellular carcinoma, everybody agree with me to select a patient with a good health. It is very difficult thing. Again, their selection criteria includes a new point where the patients who had bleeding within 6 months prior to the enrollment in the trial were excluded. You can see the combination bevacizumab use was 50 mg per kg every 3 weeks with atezolizumab 1200 mg versus sorafenib standard dose. The co-primary endpoints was OS and PFS. So what happened over here? So again, as I mentioned, selected inclusion. Patients with variational bleeding, a prior variational bleeding within 6 months prior to the study start, history of hypertensive crisis, inadequately controlled hypertension, AD evidence of bleeding diastasis is excluded out of the trial. So again, this is I will not go into the details of the patient characteristics. So this study has met a survival endpoint wherein 6-month overall survival rate was 85% and as against to 72% with sorafenib. So definitely a good results. Look at the PFS, 6-month PFS rate again superior to the sorafenib. So atezolizumab and bevacizumab improved PSF over sorafenib, PFS as well as OS. And this has been reported before also. Looking at the responses, now what is the difference between the IO drug and the TKI? If you look at the TKI's results, the response rate never matched with the survival. But in IO, if the patient responds, you can predict that patient is going to live longer. In the second line, in the newer trials or combination of nivo-ipilimumab, those patients who had CR and PR, they did much better as compared to the stable disease. And the CR patients are doing in terms of the Kaplan-Meier, they are sitting on the top of the graph. So here also you get good responses. So although this demonstrated a consistent overall survival benefit versus TKI, most of the group, the pattern was non-inclusive of those patients. They have, as I mentioned, they included only BCMC stage B, C, and there were less representation of non-etiology of HCG, which is again increasing incidence of this kind of those patients who are not hepatitis B or C positive. They are also developing hepatocellular carcinoma. This population was not represented in this particular trial. Now, looking at what happened with the adverse effect, as we know, the IO has a different set of problems as compared to the TKIs. So, as you can see, the hypertension, as bevacizumab was used over there, proteinuria was the problem, enzyme elevation was bit comparable, you can see. So the most common grade 3-4 adverse event with this combination were the hypertension, proteinuria and transaminitis. And with the sorafenib, we all know Hancock syndrome is a problem and high bilirubin. So here, the concern is we have already excluded those patients with the bleeding problems. Bleeding events occurred more frequently. In spite of carefully selecting, here again the bleeding events have happened more frequently with this experimental arm compared to sorafenib, including fetal bleeding. Therefore, you have to be very careful by choosing your patients for this combination. So, atezolizumab, bevacizumab, rituximab definitely translated into survival advantage as compared to TKI, serious adverse events and withdrawals. They are more common with the combination as compared to TKI. Higher proportion of patients of sorafenib went on to receive subsequent systemic therapy. So, this is approved by FDA as first line therapy. NCCN also mentions as a level 1 evidence in the first line. So looking at the quality of life, definitely the quality of life in terms of physical functioning, role functioning, and in terms of the symptom deterioration, time to symptom deterioration, the combination did better as compared to sorafenib. So this is what I summarized. Key inclusion, you have to be very careful in these patients. Bleeding was a problem. Quality wise, this drug is better, and this is one of the latest option in the NCCN and other guidelines for using this combination in front as a palliative therapy for unresectable advanced disease. So now what is happening beyond this? So we have sorafenib, we have lenvatinib, and we have IO plus bevacizumab combination. Now this year, because this is the latest study 22, which was tried in a combination of patients, though mostly this drug used here in the second line setting, those patients who are sorafenib naive, or those refuse sorafenib, or those intolerant to sorafenib, or those who progressed on sorafenib, they tried to use the IO combination of tremelimumab with durvalumab, with durva monotherapy, tremelimumab monotherapy, and again the different dose combination of two IO drugs. Why it is important? As we know, the CTLA4 mechanism of action of the CTLA4 inhibitors, and that both have a synergistic effect in other diseases like melanoma as well as lung cancer, and after that they have tried here. So what is interesting in this, if you can see the first dose, tremelimumab 300 mg and durvalumab. So they try to give a single dose. This is a phase 1 and 2 trial. In the second line setting, and few patients were in the first line. They give only one dose of tremelimumab as a priming. There is a they tried to prime this by inhibiting the CTLA4, and then they continued only durvalumab. And this hypothesis proved, and can see the median overall survival was 18.73 months. Excellent, but this is again a phase 2 trial, and they are trying to bring this into a first line now in the form of Himalaya trial. So this looks promising as a combination of IO. Even with the single agent tremelimumab, the numbers looks very good, 15.1. So again, I will not go into this thing because this is again a hypothesis, and this combination, as I mentioned, is coming into the form of a phase 3 trial, Himalaya trial. So what are the ongoing trials going on? So you can see the Himalaya trial, as I mentioned, which will get finished this year. So maybe ESMO or next year's ASCO will get the results. This is a first line. So we have a promising combination coming up next year in the form of IO. There are other combinations like TKI and cabozantinib and atezolizumab in the first line again. Most of these drugs are compared to sorafenib. As I mentioned, there is no positive trial post lenvatinib. So coming to those patients who are going to progress, you can see the combination of lenvatinib and pembrolizumab. So we will have a trial where they are comparing with the lenvatinib again in the first line. This may take around 2-3 years, and there are combination of nivolumab, ipilimumab based on the phase 2 data coming from the Keynote 040, Checkmate 040. It is difficult to remember all these things. Checkmate 040 as one of the nivolumab, ipilimumab, and it was again a promising in second line. So they are bringing this agent into first line, and here they are comparing it to TKI, sorafenib, or lenvatinib. Again, it will take 3-4 years. So what is now in the present time we have? So I am not going to details of the intermediate stage disease. So we are focusing here for advanced stage palliative setting. We have sorafenib since last more than a decade. Everybody uses it. Everybody knows it is a toxic to use it. But what is important for sorafenib, you have to titrate the dose and make sure that the patient remains on sorafenib. I have personal experience of toxicity with sorafenib. It takes your head. It is problematic for the physician also. But if you can carefully maintain the dose or reduce dose, in the real world data also, those patients who maintain the lower dose also, it has translated into better survival. As I mentioned, the response rate here in TKI doesn't correlate with the survival. So make sure that you maintain. You see excellent results with some sorafenib. Sometimes, most of the time, you deal with the toxicity only. But it's a good drug. It is going to remain there because we can see the combinations are being compared with sorafenib as standard of care. The next drug is lenvatinib. You can select, but as in the trial inclusion also, you can see that population was carefully selected. That more advanced disease they have excluded from the trial. And the third combination is atezolizumab, bevacizumab. But again, we see if patients in the trial are carefully selected, in spite of that, they faced with the problem of bleeding. So when you put patients on combination, you have to be very careful. And as we know, hepatocellular carcinoma affects the liver, where the bleeding things are controlled in the liver only. So you have to be very careful while monitoring the toxicity in terms of bleeding and hypertension, because you have obviously added the bevacizumab over there. We'll not go into the second lines, but most of the second line trials have been tried after sorafenib. And if you so this is just to show the survival, how the survival has improved. If you can see the sharp on one end and Iambrave 150 on the other end, even in the comparator arm, the median overall survival with the sorafenib was 10.7 in 2007, and now we are in 2020. You can see this checkmate 459 and Iambrave 150 has improved the survival up to the tune of 15 months with the sorafenib only in the comparator. So sorafenib is a time-tested drug. It is going to be there. We are comfortable with using oral drugs. Patients are also comfortable using the oral drug. The problem is the toxicity, but yes, targeting the dose is important. Most of the second-line trials are post-sorafenib. Lenvatinib is an alternative, but we have to be careful while selecting the advanced stage disease. IO monotherapy has failed in the first line. That incited combination of IO and IO targeted therapies. One of the combination is already approved in the first line. The combination of tremelimumab and durvalumab is very promising. You can see the better survival in the stage. Phase 2 trial is almost 19 months. So this is what we have reviewed the data, and thank you, Sachin, for giving me opportunity to be a part of this important meeting. Yes, there is a lot much happening in the field of immunology, but still those old drugs are going to remain, and we have to use this drug one after the other so that we can prolong the survival of the patient by judiciously using these drugs one after the other. And I conclude my talk.
We have few minutes for questions. Actually, we can ask Dr. Bharat.
Before that, so not that people know, because they have seen the era. I see Parikh sir also here. So before 2007, there was nothing in the field of hepatocellular carcinoma. So and Sachin, we haven't seen closely that era. So we started practicing when sorafenib was available. So I really appreciate if sir can give the input. Three of them can give the input. How did they manage when there was nothing in the field of hepatocellular carcinoma?
It is very difficult. You are helpless, and quite often it is lower. Local treatments we did something valid. And, drugs have a lot of toxicity with minimal benefits.
So, yeah, Sachin started by comparing lung cancer, right? And what we see in HCC today was also true for lung cancer a few years ago.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that HCC also will progress. We just have not hit the right target. And once we get insight into that, whether it is biomarker or whether it is drug, HCC will also improve.
True. And nivolumab with lenvatinib combination is also FDA approved for first and second line advanced HCC. Bharat, any
FDA is giving approval even in 2020. They have FDA has approved tremelimumab as an orphan, tremelimumab along with durvalumab as an orphan combination. But if you look at the level of evidence and the NCCN guidelines, still even they mentioned Corfox also one of the category 2B regimen in the management of this thing. Nivolumab, you can use it in the first line also, but there is a category 2B level of evidence. There is no, but what you know here, you can use the IO drug in hepatocellular carcinoma. There is no need to do the PD-L1 here. So HCCT specifically, we have to remember that there is no need to do a biomarker. Irrespective of PD-L1 expression, you can use the IO drug. Now, some patient wants to avoid or some physician wants to avoid the sorafenib toxicity. You can use single agent nivolumab based on the data because the data looks good, but the primary endpoint of superiority was not made in the nivolumab trial. That is the checkmate 459.
And maybe we can also share that sorafenib tolerance is not good. The hand-foot syndrome is really difficult to manage, and most of the patients themselves they decrease the dose. Nobody is happy taking 1800 mg.
So the
And
problem
they
with
themselves decrease to 400.
see sorafenib. The problem with the sorafenib is not only the patient toxicity. The physician gets the toxicity. Patient is going to call you repeatedly. So what is important from the real world data? Those patients who manage take even the lower dose up to 400, not below 400. Those patients who reduce dose to 200, they never benefited from this. You have to manage a dose till 400, and in the data from the Koreans, they have reported recently, those patients live longer. You have to maintain the patient at least should take 400 continuously, and for that, either you start with lower dose and try to go up, or either you start and monitor the toxicity so that patient doesn't lose. The follow-up should not. Sometimes what happens, we start a higher dose, patient develop toxicity, and he will never come to you because he says that he will blame the physician. That is why I mentioned physician also faces the toxicity, though it is not physical. So maintaining dose is important, whatever, but not 400.
Okay.
So sorafenib, sir can give very good because RCC also. I have my personal experience of using sorafenib in the second line because patient was not affording axitinib. It was bilateral RCC to begin with. Patient didn't tolerate sunitinib after resecting one kidney and keeping the one kidney behind. And after that, he developed the lung. This is very bad with pleural effusion, malignant pleural effusion.
What we have seen is that the patients with hepatocellular carcinoma, they are not able to tolerate sorafenib with the dose that is given. But RCC patients are able to tolerate. I think there's quite a good number of you must have seen that the RCC is able to take up the proper dose of sorafenib.
So we can go to the next session. We are about 2 minutes beyond the time actually now.
So I think that the next speaker is Dr. Sandeep Batra, who is the Director, Department of Medical Oncology, Next Specialty Hospital, Saket, Delhi, and he will be talking to us about precision medicine for example, cancer, optimal use of targeted therapies. Dr. Sandeep Batra.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Sachin, for organizing the meeting and inviting. And good afternoon, everyone, including the teachers, Dr. Dawal, Dr. Parvesh, and all of those whom I cannot see on the screen. So, as Dr. Parvesh said that till about a few years back, lung cancer we did not have a target, and now with the targets, the outcome has drastically changed. Though we not cancer, with the ovarian cancer, though in the first decade of the century and the first half of the second decade, we were not spoiled with the choices, but now in the ovarian cancer, having found the targets, both the specific and the non-specific one, the outcomes are improving, and today's topic is the precision medicine for the ovarian cancer, the role of targeted therapy, and that too in the lab setting. So
Sandeep, we can't hear you properly.
So
maybe just see. I think you can switch off your video if there is a signal issue.
okay, let me do that.
That might improve this. Yeah,
Am I better now?
better audible. Yes.
Yes. So, epithelial ovarian cancer is highest mortality of all the gynecological cancers with a 5-year survival, which is to the best of the estimates 30 to 40%. Approximately 70% patients with an advanced disease do develop a recurrence within 3 years of completing first-line chemotherapy. And whenever there is a recurrence, it is equal to incurability and chronicity of the disease, and there comes the role of the recurrence therapies and the targeted therapies. Though effective treatment is available, cure is not the target, and the treatment is basically to remove, reduce, or stabilize the tumor load and to prolong the disease-free survival of the patient, and thus aiming at improving the overall survival of the patient. And it's not a one-size-fitting-all approach. We have to make decisions based on the case-to-case basis, in which various factors, including the sensitivity to platinums, platinum-free interval, tolerance to the previous treatment, residual toxicities of the previous treatment, the comorbidities, as well as the targets which we can exploit to improve the patient outcomes have to be taken into account. And add to that, it's from the patient side also, the patient willingness for the further treatment, including the performance status, general conditions, signs and symptoms, how quickly we need to control the symptoms, have to be taken into consideration. And besides the physician factors, the patient factors, there are two more factors as well, in which the histological subtypes, the genetic mutation status, number of lines of previous treatment received also are important. So, there is no perfect right treatment for a particular recurrent ovarian cancer patient, and all the factors as alluded above has to be taken into consideration, and prioritization has to be done based on whenever we prioritize the treatment based on the condition of the patient. That's basically the beauty of the personalized medicine. So coming to the first target, which is a dual target drug, but it is a very non-specific target. It's a VEGF inhibitor. It targets the neovasculature created by the tumor cells around them, and we all are well versed with the drug bevacizumab. And this is an old drug in an old wine bottle. And these are the three trials which I feel are significant enough in the recurrent setting to have our faith in this recurrent ovarian cancer, irrespective of fact whether it is a platinum sensitive or platinum resistant. I will be coming to details of this, but just a snapshot. So OCEANS is a trial in the platinum sensitive relapse, first relapse. This chemotherapy was compared with the chemotherapy plus bevacizumab combination, and the primary objective was to find out the progression-free survival, and reach the primary objective successfully, with a difference of almost 4 months between the bevacizumab plus minus in the experimental arm, with a significant p-value. Simply group 0213 in the lower part of the slide also was in the platinum sensitive relapsed ovarian cancer, and the protocol was with the active chemotherapy based with the bevacizumab combination, and the primary endpoint was overall progression-free survival and the overall survival both, and it reached both the endpoints, but overall survival was a very borderline significant overall survival difference. Similarly, Aurelia was in the platinum-resistant ovarian cancer relapse, in which bevacizumab was added to a non-platinum chemotherapy, and the primary endpoint was PFS. And as if you can see, if it was a platinum-sensitive relapse versus a platinum-resistant relapse, the quantum of benefit given was by bevacizumab was almost the same, that is 3 to 4 months. So, irrespective of the chemotherapy backbone, the anti-VEGF therapy worked in all these three types of trials, and all the both the types of platinum-sensitive versus platinum-resistant ovarian cancer patients. Such the bevacizumab, we have other targets with the who are targeting the VEGF, pazopanib. We have used in the past sedarinib, not clinically available to us, but there are trials showing there is a significant PFS benefit targeting the VEGF. Similarly, nindatinib is also as a VEGF target, and we have anti-EGFR, trastuzumab, pertuzumab. So I will not be taking the drugs which are not available or which are not clinically useful to us as on today, or we are not clinically using in the clinic. However, there are progression-free survival differences there. So this table basically tells us what has been the quantum of difference achieved with the bevacizumab. GO213 about 3 to 4 months, OCEANS about 4 months, Aurelia about 3 to 4 months, and all with the significant p-value. And overall survival, except for the GO213, was not different in the OCEANS or the Aurelia trial. And secondary endpoint, progression-free survival being the first endpoint, was met in all the three trials, making bevacizumab as the drug of choice to be used in a platinum system or platinum-resistant first line. Now, this is a brief schema. I will not be dwelling into the much details of the treatments, but this schema tells us patients with platinum-sensitive recurrent ovarian cancer progressing after first-line chemotherapy with no prior bevacizumab exposure, and number was total enrolled was 484. They were randomized between carboplatin with gemcitabine. So carboplatin dose was best as compared to what we used clinically, carboplatin AUC 4 day 1, and that was combined with gemcitabine plus bevacizumab in the experimental arm and with the placebo in the control arm. And with the primary endpoint of PFS and the secondary endpoints of overall response rate, duration of response, overall survival, and the side effects, especially the GI perforation and other adverse events, were captured. Now, if you see the chart, PFS is there in the chart on the left side in the Kaplan-Meier curve, which shows there is a significant difference of gemcitabine, carboplatin, with bevacizumab versus the placebo. And if we go to the table on the right side, the median PFS difference of 8.4 versus 12.4 in the active arm, there was a p-value of 0.00001 for a stratified HR of 0.484, thus establishing this drug in the platinum-sensitive relapse. Overall response rate with a significant hazard ratio of 0.53 were also impressive. The final OS analysis, as already alluded, that the endpoint, it was a secondary endpoint, and the overall survival was not proven to be better with the bevacizumab as compared to placebo. So only the progression-free survival outcomes were better significantly in the OCEANS trial. Coming to the platinum-resistant recurrent ovarian cancer, platinum-sensitive again, GOG212. Now this was not only a simple chemotherapy trial, it was also patients who were platinum-sensitive recurrent cancers, whether they were surgical candidate, yes or no. If yes, they were operated versus not operated, versus those surgical candidates which were not surgical candidate, they again were randomized. So carboplatin, paclitaxel versus carbo-pacli plus bevacizumab, followed by maintenance bevacizumab. Primary objective, since it was a huge trial, overall survival was also the primary objective is this trial. And idea was also to find out whether in the platinum-sensitive ovarian cancer, the use of secondary cytoreductive surgery doesn't give any survival benefit. And secondary objectives of PFS, quality of life issues, and any hypersensitivities. Now PFS 10.4 versus 13.8 months, almost about 3 months difference. Overall survival 37.3 versus 42.2 months, so significant overall survival difference. However, the p-value was 0.056 at the borderline of being significant. So based on GO213, we can say in a platinum-sensitive recurrent ovarian cancer, combining a bevacizumab plus minus a cytoreductive surgery gives us an overall survival advantage as well as the progression-free survival advantage. Coming to the platinum-resistant category, which is almost about 50% of our clinical practice patients, bevacizumab addition to the chemotherapy, with the chemotherapy being of the physician choice, it could have been paclitaxel, topotecan, or liposomal doxorubicin. All the 3 arms, with or without bevacizumab, with the primary endpoint of PFS, the endpoint was met even in the platinum-resistant population. As you can see, the orange curve, which is with the bevacizumab, with the progression-free survival 6.7 months versus the 3.4 months of the chemotherapy alone, the survival, PFS survival outcome was different. So overall survival, PFS was also proven in the platinum-resistant population also. So whenever we are giving bevacizumab, we should consider whether the patient has been pre-treated with bevacizumab. So till now, there was a thinking that previously treated bevacizumab should not reuse the same drug as we use P-hold2 for the chemotherapy, except for the platinums. Whether there is a quick gain of symptoms necessary, it requires treatment ascitic capping, and is there any existing contraindication to use of the bevacizumab? So, pointing to the point 1, so if patient has already been exposed to bevacizumab, one can reuse the same drug, and it was shown in the OB17 trial that those patients in which bevacizumab had already been exposed and bevacizumab is reused in such patients, there is a significant progression-free survival difference of 3 months, PFS of 11.8 months in the active bevacizumab arm, which have been already treated with bevacizumab arm, versus 8.8 months in those patients who were never treated with the bevacizumab. So based on this trial data, we can reuse the bevacizumab in patients who have already been exposed in the first line to the bevacizumab. Coming to the back to what about ascites? So because since removal of the type ascites is a part of the palliation and symptom control, is a drug can control the ascites, and that was proven in the subset analysis of the earlier trial, which showed that patients out of the 113 patients who required ascitic tapping, 17% patients treated with the chemotherapy alone needed paracentesis. In contrast, only 2% patients in which additional bevacizumab was added required the paracentesis, thus proving that anti-VEGF therapy also helps in patients who have troublesome ascites requiring repeated tapping. Coming to the contraindication, grade 2 or 3 hypertension, proteinuria, we all know whether and when these contraindications exist, we should not be using or we should be discontinuing with the bevacizumab. Coming to the second part, the ultimate target, the PARP inhibitors. So as the knowledge about the PARP inhibitors is exploding, I am coming to the conclusion that PARP inhibitor is going to be the drug which we will be using invariably in all the ovarian cancer patients, irrespective of the BRCA mutated or HRD positive status, and we will have the clinical marker of platinum sensitivity to say whether these patients are going to respond to any sort of PARP inhibitors in future or not. So we all know the homologous recombination repair path with BRCA plays an important role, both BRCA1 and 2, but besides there are 5-6 other genes like RAD50, ATM also, which also take part in the HRD repair, so PARP inhibitors not only block the functioning of the BRCA, but also hamper with the functioning of the other genes, lead to the repair and ultimately leading to the incoherent sort of replication, not relying the repair, leading to the cell death. Now, if we see the HRD from earlier understanding of BRCA positivity of about 10 to 20% so wide variations in the different populations, now we have come to the point that probably there are tumors, all the tumors, ovarian tumors, they are either HR or homologous recombination deficient or proficient, and almost about 50% fall to either category. So even if they are not germline BRCA1 or 2 mutated, they can be somatic BRCA1 or 2 mutated or methylated or RAD-C or RAD-D or ATM mutated, and all these patients, they uniformly respond to PARP inhibitor therapy. Now these are the PARP inhibitors which as on today are approved, out of which olaparib is freely available in India. Niraparib is also to some extent available in India, but rucaparib availability is yet not there as far as I know. And they are approved in all BRCA mutated patients and rucaparib also in the non-BRCA mutated in the maintenance part after the fourth line. So like we did for the bevacizumab, these are the snapshots of the trial which established these PARP inhibitors in their respective setting. So olaparib, study 19, SOLO 2 and SOLO 3 in the BRCA mutated, platinum sensitive, relapsed ovarian cancer with or without high grade serous carcinomas. When they were compared with the placebo or with the single agent chemotherapy, the response rate, the PFS, there was a very wide difference. Now, we should understand that whenever we talk about PFS in bevacizumab, the PFS starts from the day one bevacizumab is combined with chemotherapy, and that 4-month PFS survival is inclusive of the chemotherapy backbone also. In contrast, when we are using PFS for the PARP inhibitors, now PARP inhibitors PFS starts from the day the chemotherapy is finished. If they are not combined, they are under trials for combination with chemotherapy. So the PARP inhibitor PFS starts from the day the chemotherapy is finished and the PARP inhibitors are started. So they don't have the benefit of the backbone of chemotherapy. And if you see study 19, SOLO 2, SOLO 3, all establish a significant progression-free survival difference between the BRCA mutated arms, though all they were being mono arm studies, though they were phase 2 and phase 3, but they showed a significant survival progression-free survival difference. Overall survival difference will also be coming into force. Now, SOLO 2 in the second line, SOLO 2 the schema is olaparib 300 mg twice a day versus placebo, and the primary endpoint was progression-free survival, and the secondary endpoints were overall survival, quality of life, safety, and other standard issues that we see, and a significant also secondary endpoint of quality of life issues. Coming to the progression-free survival, you can see in contrast to what we have seen in the bevacizumab, the curves are very widely separated, and then they have become parallel like whale tracks. So expect this expectation may be like a share market, but my expectation is that this progression-free survival is also going to give us a this overall survival advantage also. And if you see the difference, quantum of difference, despite chemotherapy backbone being not there, in bevacizumab it was only 4 months, but in the PARP inhibitor arm it is almost about 1 year or more than that, and we see almost 2 years in the PARP sensitive setting also, which I am not going to talk to. So based on the data of the study 19 and then SOLO2 was approved for the recurrent BRCA-mutated ovarian cancer post second line of chemotherapy who have responded to platinums. Similarly, niraparib, 2 trials, NOVA and AVANOVA, with or without bevacizumab. Again, the population was BRCA-mutated, which was non-germline or somatic mutation versus germline mutated. The progression-free survival difference you can see significantly better. If you see in the NOVA arm, it was PFS of 21 months versus 5.5 months the placebo. It's a huge difference. We usually say stage 3 ovarian cancer approximately about 12 to 15 months is the time for the recurrence, and if you are giving a progression-free survival difference itself for 16 months with a single tablet, then probably you have already achieved what the other drugs could not have done. So, NOVA study design, BRCA mutated, germline randomized versus non-BRCA mutated, niraparib given versus placebo. So, BRCA versus non-BRCA mutated both, the drug uniformly improved the progression-free survival, but as expected with the BRCA mutation, the quantum of benefit was more versus non-BRCA mutated. And now this is being realized that this non-BRCA mutated was actually the HRD deficient subgroup, which also got the benefit of the PARP inhibitors. Different subgroups, BRCA mutated versus non-BRCA mutated, somatic BRCA mutated, HRD positive, HRD negative. There was a uniform outcome difference, however, the months were lower when we were moving from BRCA mutated to non-BRCA mutated subsets. So based on the platinum sensitivity, those patients who are platinum sensitive, so it's like a poor man's test to find a biomarker, maybe a predictive biomarker that those who are platinum sensitive, even if they are BRCA non-mutated, will be having a better outcome as compared to we already know clinically that platinum resistant do much better than the platinum sensitive, and same holds true for the PARP inhibitors as well. If you are BRCA mutated and platinum sensitive, that is the best combination to have as for the disease characteristics. Rucaparib again, area 2 and 3, similar trials, platinum sensitive relapsed ovarian cancers with high grade serous histology and progression-free survival. You can see the difference, almost about 1 year difference between the 2 arms. So based on this, Rucaparib got accelerated approval with the 600 mg twice a day dose with the germline on somatic BRCA mutations with the recurrent ovarian cancer exposed to 2 prior lines of treatment with a partial or complete response to the last line of treatment. Study design, area 3, Rucaparib versus placebo. Endpoint was again the PFS, and as would have been expected, the endpoint of PFS in the BRCA mutated platinum sensitive population was the highest, 12 versus platinum refractory non-BRCA mutated category. So based again on platinum sensitivity, the outcome PFI of more than 18 months at a median PFS of 25 months versus those.
We have to wind up.
Winding up. So invariably for me, all PARP inhibitors are similar. The only problem is with the widespread availability. I think Rucaparib and niraparib are lagging behind, but may come up based on the availabilities. So PARP inhibitor is one of the most important advances for ovarian cancers in the past decades. Maintenance with any of the PARP inhibitors improves the progression-free survival. BRCA mutated patients benefit the most, but no predictive NGS test is sensitive enough to rule out the benefit for BRCA wild type. So in the interest of time, I had something for the immunotherapy, but I think I will need to wind up saying thank you for giving the opportunity to talk about this. Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions for Sandeep? Sandeep, I just wanted to ask you one question. This is a very practical question that we usually face. What is the usually dose of bevacizumab that you use per kilogram?
So if I am going to use a dose, I use it 15 milligram per kg. But if I am using a 2 weekly dose, I use 10 milligram per kg. So to make it simple, if I am using a platinum sensitive disease with a protocol like reintroduction of paclitaxel carboplatin on a 3 weekly basis, I will choose 15 milligram per kg. But if I am going for something like gemcitabine based or liposomal doxorubicin based, I will go for a 2 weekly regimen. You are the teacher, sir. You can
How
tell
many
me.
people use this dose?
Sir, it must be my thing.
This I'm just asking.
So people have used 5 milligram because
Yeah, 5, 7.5, 10, 15. So,
Yes.
what is the opinion of the other people? I just want to know. Purvish? Okay,
7.5 weekly.
7.5, okay.
So
I was
because-
using 10.
So
10
there was a
milligram and
since we have overlapping data from the colorectal cancer, also the doses that have been used in colorectal are also widely prevalent. So it
Yeah,
is
that's what I'm saying.
yes. So
And then all of us write up, कि 400 है या 500 है, 600 है. So that is the usual thing that we do make compromises. And any other questions for Sandeep?
So one question I need to ask: are we going to use PARP inhibitor maintenance in the non-BRCA mutated patients? Any one of you is practicing that in the first line? So BRCA non-mutated, PARP inhibitor in the first line.
I don't think so. I'm not doing that.
Okay. Because the trials are coming in an unselected population and they are showing some benefit with the use of the PARP inhibitors.
Chandan, are you doing that? Dr. Chandan from PJ? He has a lot of ovarian cancer on his follow-up.
Yes, sir. Yes. Hello. Question is the olaparib non-BRCA mutant in first line?
Yes.
No.
Olaparib versus rucaparib versus niraparib, any of three.
Rucaparib, niraparib not easily available, so that's why only
No,
olaparib is the BRCA mutant.
So if given a choice that you have availability of niraparib or rucaparib, will you be using this drug in the first line?
If available, I will use it.
How about second line?
Second line, yes.
You can always use it.
Yes, we can always use it.
Yes.
Question is about the first line, non-BRCA mutated in the first line.
Yeah.
Because I had a hard time counseling a patient with a non-BRCA mutated who came with the niraparib data for using in a non-mutated patient.
And HRT is not easily available. The
That's
thyroid
right.
has correct. So
Yes, that's right.
absolutely.
I think we should move on to the next talk now, sir. Please.
Thank
Okay,
you,
the
sir.
next speaker is
Next talk is Vineet Talwar. This study, this session is sponsored by Dr. Intas Labs. Immunotherapy and targeted therapy in MRCCC, current standard of care. And Dr. Talwar, we all know, is the director of the Department of Medical Oncology, Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute, Cancer Institute and Research Center, Delhi. Vineet.
Sir, you have to unmute.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So the topic which I'll be dealing with is the status of immunotherapy and VEGF inhibitors in renal cell carcinoma. So this is my favorite slide, which I always share whenever I start my talk. Anybody can have any opinion, Sachin? Just
Some chemical application from somewhere near
Yeah,
Shimla.
can you see my arrow here? It is moving around this
Yeah.
area near the upper part. So this lady was diagnosed by us as a white CC metastatic, and after diagnosis she went to Kangra. Kangra is the place where somebody put some acidic solution there as an irritant, and she came back to us in ICU with burns. Fortunately, we were able to salvage her and then. So this is the state of affairs given now. So the basic management of metastatic renal cell cancer is aimed at maintenance of quality of life, because all these are stage 4 patients, that is the major accent, and of course prolong the life wherever possible. And in the background, we have to remember in India the drug availability, regulatory issues, and all these overtones along with the finances. So with this preamble, I go to the guidelines. The NCCN guidelines say that risk stratification is very important. You have favorable and poor and intermediate risk. The one in the favorable risk initially was sunitinib and pazopanib, that is the TKI inhibitors. Now, axitinib and pertuzumab are coming to work as the first line for the favorable risk also. In the poor and intermediate risk, you have ipilimumab and nivolumab, which is category 1. And the same axitinib and pembrolizumab is again category 1. And of course, cabozantinib is there, which is not available in our country. So the options for first line, we have tyrosine kinase inhibitors, TKIs. You can have a IO plus IO combination, that is PD-L1 inhibitors plus CTLA4 inhibitors. Then you can have IO plus TKI combination, which I'll be coming to subsequently. TKIs we have been using for donkeys of years for treatment of metastatic RCC, and all of us have gone through the body of literature with sunitinib and bevacizumab, interferon, lazertinib. So all these have been there for a long period of time, but when you see the PFS hovering between 8 to 10 months, and so is the OS, which is maximum about 26.4 months. So you have a PFS of about 10 to 11 months and an OS of about 23 to 25 months. And so is the toxicity profile. If you see it in the COMPASS trial, in which both of them are compared, that is sunitinib and pazopanib, you find that you have a plethora of side effects which all of us are very much conversant with, which can be rash, neutropenia, leukocytis, and fatigue, which is very, very important, which is seen in all these patients.
Talwar sir, excuse me, sir, some noise from some instrument, maybe a fan or something from your side.
Now is it okay?
Yeah, better. Fine, sir, fine.
Yeah, sorry for that. Okay, so you have a combination of immuno-oncology drugs and TKIs. The rationale, of course, is known to all of us. You have the CTLA blockade with ipilimumab. You have the PD-L1 and PD-1 blockade with nivolumab and pembrolizumab and all these drugs. Again, you have the latest combination of VEGF plus PD-L1 or PD-1 inhibition. What the logic behind is that elevated VEGF may inhibit the dendritic cell maturation, causing immunosuppression. And VEGF inhibition may reduce the number of Tregs and tumor-invading myeloid-derived suppressor cells. So, anti-VEGF therapy may prime for better effect with anti-PD-1 and anti-PD-L1 therapy. So this is the rationale of combining them. So after that, when you combine IO plus IO or IO-TKI, there is a revolution in metastatic RCC treatment. You have a host of drugs, combinations. You have nivolumab plus ipilimumab. You have pembrolizumab plus axitinib, avelumab plus axitinib, atezolizumab plus bevacizumab. But the drugs which have got OS benefit are nivolumab plus ipilimumab and also pembrolizumab plus axitinib. Avelumab has a PFS benefit. Atezolizumab unfortunately could not get an OS benefit after the completion of the trial. So we will be focusing on Nivo-Ipi and Pem-Axi for going forward. So if you have the IO-IO combinations, you have the nivolumab plus ipilimumab versus the standard of care, which was sunitinib in RCC. This was the CheckMate 2-1 trial. This was in the first line, and this was a phase 3 study. And we have a 42-month follow-up in this. And as you can see, even at 42 months, the favorable risk patients, there is not much of a difference which is seen between sunitinib and Ipi-Nivo. But when you go to intermediate and poor risk patients, you find that there is a stark difference when you use TKIs alone, and this is when you use ipilimumab and nivolumab. In fact, here the OS has been about 47 months at 42 months, and as compared to sunitinib, which is about 25 months. So there's almost a doubling which is seen. And as I had alluded to you, the TKIs which were used earlier for all the risk stratifications, the best OS would be about 23 to 25 months. So this is just the double of that. Coming to the IO and the VEGF combinations, the combinations I told you, these two combinations did have a PFS benefit. The ones which had an OS benefit, that was axitinib and pembrolizumab, and this was the Keynote 426 trial. And with that, it got approved by the FDA. The other two trials are pembrolizumab plus lenvatinib versus sunitinib and nivolumab plus cabazitaxel versus sunitinib. The accrual has been completed, but they have not been yet reported. So this Keynote 426 trial, just to have a deja vu, this is REM plus AXI. This was pitted against sunitinib. This was a 1:1 randomization in advanced metastatic RCC patients. And the treatment was continued till progression or unacceptable toxicity with the endpoints of overall survival and PFS. And this shows that even in favorable risk, there is a improvement in the OS as well as PFS with a significant overall response rates of 67 versus 50%. So there's about 17% improvement in the ORR. And the CR rates have moved up to 8.8%. Now, this is something which is very, very remarkable in the sense that initially you never had a complete response rate. So CR rates have gone to 8.8%. And the favorable risk had 11% CR rates, whereas the others, they had about 8%. Now, there is a question here. The good risk RCC is always related with VEGF activity, and this you find that in favorable risk is the high vascular endothelial growth factor sensitivity. And it has been seen that favorable MSKCC risk patients are characterized by the higher angiogenesis gene signature expression. So this could be a probable cause that why that in favorable risk, when ipi/nivo was pitted against sunitinib, the patients fared better with sunitinib because as the risk is lower or as the risk is favorable, there are more angiogenesis gene signatures which are expressed, and they are more adaptable to TKIs or VEGF inhibitors. And that is the reason when you combine pembrolizumab with axitinib, you get an edge. That is, you get the wider difference even in the favorable category vis-a-vis ipilimumab and nivolumab. And again, you see here, when you see across the trials, you have ipilimumab, nivolumab versus sunitinib and pem-axi versus sunitinib. You find here that in ipi/nivo, the curves start to separate around the 9 months, whereas in pem-axi, they are opened up from before only. But the argument here is that you have a long 42 weeks after which you can assess, whereas in pem-axi, you don't have that long-term data. So there is a question mark whether these two curves will come again here, unlike nivo, or they'll be going on ahead. So the problem here is if you see ipi/nivo, this thing chart, you find that 9 months the curves separate. Before these 9 months, there is not much benefit between both the two drugs. So here it could be that can this rationale be applied here in pem-axi where the curves split up at an earlier date? So would this have an edge over the other, that is IO plus TKI versus IO plus IO? So this is just a comparative assessment. So the question asked is, are we putting RCC patients at unnecessary risk which we are not offering upfront VEGF inhibition? Do we really need an ipi/nivo combination, or only anti-PD-L1 can work? And can we use only this as first? These are the questions which have been put forward. So when you use IO-IO combination, there are a lot of pros and cons. There is a mature follow-up, durable response, and unmatched quality of life issues. And there is a potential to stop therapy with higher immune-related adverse events rates. And they, of course, are unpredictable because you don't know where the drug is going to have side effects and where the drug is not going to have side effects. Whereas the TKIs, they have OS benefit. It's unclear when to stop therapy, unlike the IOs. And the follow-up is immature, and the long-term benefit is still unclear. And they also have a lower QI and a high TKI toxicity. So you have PD-L1 as a biomarker, but again, it does not help much as far as RCC is concerned, because here you don't use this when you give drugs like nivolumab. So can a biomarker help us sway our decision when we use these drugs, that is IO-IO versus IO-TKI? There are a host of emerging biomarkers with relevant studies, but again, time will tell because none of them have come out in the forefront. Suffice to say that the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio is very, very important, and so is the tumor mutational burden. Can the morbidity profile sway the decision? Well, morbidity, as you have seen, immuno-oncology drugs, sometimes it may never occur, can be dose dependent. It needs treatment resolve. When we talk of VEGF TKIs, it is almost guaranteed. It is dose dependent and usually emerges by 3 to 4 weeks and resolves on holding a drug. So there is a totally different profile as far as the adverse events are concerned, and so is the line of treatment. When you see these two drugs, that is Checkmate 214 Nivo-Ipi versus Pemaxi, you find that there are more side effects in the TKI group vis-a-vis when you use a combination of Ipi, Nivo, or when you use a combination of Pemaxi. So definitely, as far as the QOL criteria are concerned, the IOLs, they fare better as compared to the TKIs. Patient preference, well, there was a article which was, there was a poster, patient preferences and expectations of systemic therapy C. And the conclusion of this was that patients rank efficacy as the most important outcome when considering treatment options. Toxicity, time and cost are not significant priorities for patients upfront. Of course, this is from the Caucasian data, because in India, finance is a big problem. And further data is warranted to see the impact of communicating treatment options, potential discontinuation of therapy, and resulting expectations. If you have patient preferences, you have physician preference also. Physicians also, given a choice, would like to give drugs which are oral like TKI, and some of them have preferences regarding IO drugs also, because most of the side effects, as we know, are because of ipilimumab. So physicians prefer combination of ipilimumab with the TKIs or nivolumab with the TKIs, the studies which I just told you which are coming. So some, or rather most of the physicians might be uncomfortable in using PDL1 plus CTLA4 because most of the side effects are because of CTLA4 drugs. Although, as we know, that the dose of ipilimumab is very, very less, 1 milligram, when it is used in combination in RCC, unlike the higher dose which is used in nivolumab. Long-term data prospective studies are dreadfully needed because at this point of time, we are just working on PFS or the OS at 30 months or 40 months. And longer data, at least around 5 years, is warranted before we come to conclusion. First-line treatment, what is the right choice? Multiple good systemic therapy options are available. Good risk patients and those in favor will have a survival of many years with or without therapy. And there was an article in which treatment was withheld in certain patients who had a good risk. So if you have patients with intermediate or poor risk IMDC, no significant autoimmune diseases, because that's a contraindication for IO drugs. And there are some potential VEGF contraindications like comorbidities, hypertension, or intolerance. And there is a need to avoid chronic VEGF adverse events. Then you consider a combination of immuno-oncology drugs plus CTLA4. On the contrary, patients with the IMDC favorable or intermediate risk, in which there is only one point which is making the risk stratification upgrade to intermediate risk, or in patients with intermediate or poor risk disease who need a rapid response, or a need to avoid the immune-related adverse events associated with the dual IO therapy, or if the patients have a significant autoimmune disease. These are the patients who can be considered for a combination of IO plus TKI, that is pembrolizumab plus axitinib. Because at this point of time, we have two champions. One is CTLA4 plus IO and IO plus TKI, which are giving the overall survival benefits. The other drugs are definitely in the pipeline in phase 2 or 3 studies, and the results are yet to come about. And these are the phase 3 trials which are on the radar screen, that is lenvatinib plus pembrolizumab versus sunitinib versus lenvatinib and everolimus. And there's another one with cabozantinib with nivolumab versus sunitinib. All these are phase 3 trials, and the first 3 trials are the first line. And even there are trials on locally advanced and adjuvant settings in which pembrolizumab versus placebo is being tried, and nivolumab plus ipilimumab versus placebo is again being tried in T2, T3, and N1 lesions. And they are also phase 3 trials. The accrual has been completed. They are large trials. So it remains to be seen that when the results come in, they'll be very, very interesting. So I think I'll stop here, and I thank you for your patient hearing.
Vinit, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You think now first line we should straight go to one of the IO and TKI as of now?
Sir, first line,
whatever the IO is, yeah.
First line, if you say the good risk, yeah, definitely can give IO plus TKI in these patients. And you can also give TKIs alone, that is sunitinib or pazopanib in these patients. But if it is intermediate and high risk, then probably the IO plus the CTLA4 or IO plus IO has an edge. Having said that, if it is an intermediate risk and if you have only one factor which is making it intermediate risk, it has been seen that in these patients, you can still consider TKIs alone in these patients because the survival difference is very slim as compared to a combination of IO plus TKIs in the intermediate risk. If we have two or more factors which are causing it intermediate risk, then in that case, of course, IO plus TKIs come into work.
Anyone else has any questions?
Sir, I just wanted to ask, so suppose we are using combination of TKI and say pembro upfront. So what would happen to the second line here? Do we have
that is the discussion which is in most of the meetings. The second line, then you have cabozantinib which is there. Then of course combination of lenvatinib plus everolimus is there. These two can be used. See, the problem is that it can be argued both ways. You can say the first choice is the best choice. You hit with the first line, which is the best choice, which has the best PFS and OS advantage. Then probably you might get a longer delay. The other is that you hit it with one drug and then in tandem you hit it with another drug. Say you start with TKIs and then you go over to IOs or IOs and any other combination. Having said that, again, when you see the data, on one side you have an OS of about 23 months, and on the other side you have an OS of 47 months. So you have to weigh the quality of life issues, the patient's preference, the patient's finances. In India, you put patient's finances first. Then, of course, all these things come if you are in a Caucasian meeting. But if a person can, somehow wrangle the funds, then a combination of PEM plus axitinib, that is IO plus TKI, will definitely be better in the first line.
But what will be the cost of PEM plus axitinib?
So that is what I told. Barring the financial toxicity.
So I want to know for my
cost for that should be about
3 or 4. Oh.
Yes, sir, about 3.5.
That is one, but if really what you are saying 23 versus 46 or whatever, that's almost double. That is when you use let's say TKI followed by IO. Plus
this is TKI plus.
I think, sir, Dr. Raja has a lot to ask in his panel also.
Sure.
He can cover there, I think, similar issues, yeah. We can go ahead with that.
Ramesh can.
Yeah. So I think we will go on to the panel discussion, and Dr. T. Raja, you all know, is the director of the medical oncology at the Institute at Chennai. And he is going to moderate this session. panelists are Dr. Chandan Das from Chandigarh, Dr. Manisha Singh from Patna, Dr. Samir Khatri from Delhi, Dr. Prashant Mehta from Faridabad, Dr. Vinit Talwar, and Dr. Chitresh Agarwal from Chandigarh.
Thank you, sir. Good time to be. That was given to me was targeted immunotherapy in renal cell carcinoma and bladder and heart. I thought it was really too much to cover in the 30 minutes that we were given. So I thought, okay, at least I'll focus on one disease and try to cover the entire range of what you have given. And I welcome my panelists. Thank you all of them. And my first, I'll begin with the panelists. We heard from Dr. Vinit Talwar that now there is so much opportunity, so much drugs available, and the issue now is that how do we go about choosing them, and how each one is really trying to ride these horses and try to figure out how they want to use it in their day-to-day clinic. That's what I want to bring about. So
sir, Dr. Niti Rajada is also there. She would also be Dr. Niti Rajada.
Dr. Niti.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I thought I'll have 2 to 3 cases. Actually, 4 cases are there. Whatever time permits, I'll keep going on. Whenever you want, you can stop me. And a bit of how each one will manage in their current setting today. That's what I want to focus. And Dr. Talwar pointed out 2 important things. One, when he decides, he told that look at the risk category, and then he also said that look at their tolerance to immunotherapy. That seems to be 2 important keystones how one makes the decision today. It looks like that. So my question I'll begin with Dr. Chandan. Now the IMDC criteria is something that is now in vogue. I have displayed it for you, and how relevant are you? How relevant are these for you in your decision making, and are they really different from the MSKCC criteria? And how do you use this in your decision making, Dr. Chandan?
Yes, sir. The IMDC is really important. The initial trial, I would say, this is MSKCC, which include the LDH and calcium. Right? And the newer IMDC actually mostly focus on CBC, hemoglobin, neutrophil, and platelets. Also the calcium, and mostly focus on the time to interval from diagnosis and the performance status by Karnofsky scale. So the point I want to ask, when you see a patient, the first thing we'll see the time interval and the PS. The next thing I'm going to see is the CBC, because that is relevant for IMDC. And for all the patients we actually discuss in our multidisciplinary training, IMDC scoring is a must for before starting any of the treatments. So we follow the IMDC and we do according to the IMDC.
Thank you, Dr. Chandan. Dr. Manisha,
Yes, sir.
When you give me some your tricks of the trade when you have stone process, when you have patients in front of you. Dr. Vinita pointed out that how he would mentally approach a patient. Give me an overview on what are all the boxes that you're going to tick with before.
Sir, what I would believe that RCC involves a very large spectrum.
Fine.
Am I audible, sir?
You are audible.
Yeah.
Tell
What I think, sir, that yes. Sir, before I make my answer, let me think in terms of RCC. I think it involves a large spectrum of tumor with a different spectrum of mutation.
No. Sorry. I just want to again confine.
Varying in ISC feature mutation.
Dr. Manisha, 1 second. I think let's confine ourselves to the clear cell RCC, and right now we'll focus on clear cell RCC because that's the segment at least we can do justice in the given time. So now you can go about answering.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So that is what I'm saying, that if the patient, depending upon the risk category that we are talking about, the PD-L1 also depends upon what is the category of the patient. Patient with favorable risk had lower PDL1, hence benefited from sunitinib. So that was the rationale with which we started the treatment. And intermediate and high risk patient has shown more responsive to the IO therapy.
Fine.
So for favorable risk, intermediate and poor risk, I'll use a combination of IO until and unless we have a more mature data that or the patient can go for as per the trial that Dr. Vineet Talwar has shown the axitinib and also the pembro has outcome in the favorable risk. But to me, for the favorable, I think I'll go with sunitinib on that.
Okay. Dr. Vineet, I'll come to you. I'm just beginning with this.
Sir, Dr. Vineet's signal has dropped. He's not there for me. Maybe he's rejoining. Yeah.
No problem. When he rejoins, please let me know.
Yeah.
And, I'm. This is one of the cases that we saw long back. This patient was operated clear cell carcinoma 2015, presented with metastatic disease in 2017. And the clear cell carcinoma, as I pointed out, I want to confine the discussion to this particular segment. I'm present with local recurrence and lung metastatic disease with a favorable AMDC profile in July 2017. So my question to my panelist is very simple. In their day-to-day practice, I have given a simple model case, a reasonably middle-aged patient with a favorable IFDC profile, clear cell carcinoma. Dr. Chitresh, in most of your patients, what would you want to choose, Dr. Chitresh?
So are we going for a PDL testing again for the metastatic side?
No, I am not asking about PDL1 testing at this point. A question to Dr. Chitresh. Chitresh, how do you choose therapy in such a simple model patient in most of your patients, if you are available? Dr.
Chandan, maybe you can take it.
Okay, sir. This is the most common scenario in our patients. The patient with metastasis, lung metastasis or bone metastasis or liver metastasis with a favorable IMDC profile. See, my choice of in this patient, the TKI, and most of the time I prescribe pazopanib and sometimes sunitinib.
Okay. And the question here is that, we have also started, I totally agree with you, in 2017, we have started this patient on sunitinib. And in about a few months' time, in February 2018, the patient shows a partial response. And so now already Dr. Vineet Talwar presented these NCCN guideline options to us. And which patient would you want, Dr. Chandan, to consider TKI, and which patient would you want to consider IO plus TKI? How do you go about it?
Patients who are poor IMDC patient, they are really bad patient for TKI only. So if everything permits, I'll go for pembrolizumab and axitinib. The few patients I actually started on pembro and axitinib, they are doing excellently well. That's why I'm very much happy to use pembro and axi for the poor risk IMDC patient if affordable and all things are fine.
Okay, we'll ask the other panelists, Dr. Nitin, if you are there. Nitin.
Dr. Nitin. So, if this is a favorable risk patient and if I have all resources, in the first line setting, I would want to use the best combination. And probably perceived combination may not be a real option, but may not data proving it to be superior, but I would probably try to use pembro and axitinib in the first line setting. But since in 2017, definitely this debate was not there and we had sunitinib.
No.
So in the second...
My question is again rephrased to you. It was like, I totally agree, but in majority of your patients today in your practice, what is that you want to do? Or what is that you are doing?
So in first line setting is what I'm answering.
First line setting, favorable risk profile.
So first line setting, favorable risk, again, when option permits, yes, in our country cost is a major issue, I would use a combination drug. I'll try to use TKI with immuno-oncology drug. But practically, we would normally have a person who's not very physically fit. I'll choose Nintedanib and Pazopanib.
Okay, fine. So that's the majority practice. I believe that's what is the majority practice as of now. But then, there is more stronger and stronger, recommendation to consider immune checkpoint inhibitors, as all of you have pointed out. There is a real thrust towards, in fact, they want the decision-making algorithm to go. This is the European Association of Urology guideline that would say that try to offer pembrolizumab plus axitinib in treatment-naive patients in IMDZ, any IMDZ risk metastatic clear cell RCC. And then you see that if it is intermediate and poor risk, go for a doublet. And then the way the recommendation is gone about is sunitinib, pazopanib in patients who cannot receive or tolerate immune checkpoints. What I'm trying to allude is look at the thrust towards the immune checkpoint inhibitors. That's what I'm pointing out. But of course, in a day-to-day clinic, you have all pointed out what we can do. And Dr. Talwar alluded to this data from Checkmate 214. So let's look at this particular data in some close quarters. This is the data, the doublet, and what happened with this data is this Nivo-IP, and this is the intention to treat arm. There is an OS superiority, but when you look at when you divide them between favorable risk profile patients and intermediate and poor risk profile patients, you immediately realize that the doublet did not benefit as far as the OS goes in favorable risk profile patients, and the benefit was clearly confined to the intermediate and the poor risk patients. Whereas the pembrolizumab and axitinib combo, the IO and immune checkpoint combo, showed superior PFS and OS in the intent to treat population, and also in the favorable risk profile, you see that there is a PFS superiority and there is an ORR superiority. I think based on that, I agree with most of our panelists who would say that in the real life setting, they are doing either sunitinib or pazopanib, but then given a choice, they would want to go for IO and axitinib option. That's what they said. And now I will come to Chandan. Chandan, in intermediate poor risk patients today, how comfortable you are in offering them, straight away these immune checkpoint inhibitors, either as a singlet or as a IO combo plus TKI, or as a doublet. How practical is it happening in your setting, Dr. Chandan?
Yes, in my setting, if it's a poor risk patient, I will definitely counsel for the combination of VEGF and IO. In intermediate, I will give two options: give for the IO and VEGF or the TKI. It's fine for me in intermediate risk because the benefit is very thin, super thin. That's why both are fine for me in intermediate group. And cabozantinib is not yet available for us.
I agree. Now, Manisha, how would you negotiate this patients, intermediate and poor risk patient, in real life setting? What do you do? How do you counsel? How do you get them to the table finally on some choice or other? Dr. Manisha Singh? Dr. Niti?
So again, sir, when the choice permits, I would want to use a pembro plus axitinib combination. Nivolumab based combination, single agent nivolumab is fine, but I've not been using ipilimumab a lot because of poor availability and of course very toxic. Cabozantinib in our scenario is not available. But we again face a situation in which pembro and axitinib is not something which is in reach of the patients, and in that case, single agent sunitinib is also sometimes prescribed.
Agree. So you say that finally it still boils down to our age-old sunitinib or pazopanib, or maybe in some patients.
Can I say something?
Yeah, yes, please.
Even if I counsel for the IO and VEGF and all sort of thing, most of our patients are still going to receive the pazopanib in poor risk patient also. So I have to see a lot of things before saying the IO and VEGF. That's
No, No, that's totally agreed. But the message here is that at this point, at least 2 years back, even this counseling was not there. That's what I want to tell you. There was no way.
Yes, definitely. Now we are a better counsel for IO.
I think there is so much of availability of data, and again so much of conviction from all the panelists and again rest of the fraternity that I would believe at this point, if there is a poorest patient, at least all of us are going to try and counsel them for a IO plus TKI or a doublet IO if possible. So is that a fair statement to make, Dr. Niti?
So as
Dr. Chandan,
Yes.
what are all the, if at all you are counseling, what are all the adverse events that we need to cover for IO plus TKI or a doublet IO? What are all the adverse events that you will look for if at all you start your patients?
So I would say the IO are relatively tolerable. The important side effect which actually sees by image, by the testing only, mostly endocrine toxicity, hypothyroidism is the most common toxicity I actually encounter frequently. In pneumonia and others, the hepatotoxicity is, I would say, infrequently, I would say. So whenever I'm testing for the patient, I said it's generally most well tolerable as compared to any of the chemotherapy. But sometimes these may happen. These are the side effects. These may happen, and the incidence are really, really low, and they can be easily managed. The TKI in returns, TKI, the most important toxicity for me is fatigue. Most of my patients are really, really fatigued and diarrhea for sunitinib and prazapanic. So these are the important side effect toxicity, and obviously the hand-foot syndrome. I usually counsel the patients.
Dr. Rajesh sir, Dr. Chitresh Agarwal is there now. You can involve him here.
Thank you. I will. Thank you. So I know there's a good amount of counseling that goes on. Dr. Chitresh, are you able to hear us, Dr. Chitresh? Yeah, good evening to you. And we were really trying to break our head on what are the first line options in clear cell metastatic RCC, given that there are so many choices available, and we were trying to say that there are two worlds. There is a dream world and there is a practical world. And practical world is finally, we all dream about all the IOs and finally come to TKI. That's what the panelists are doing.
For all, though there is data for everything, but I still in my own clinical practice, most of my patients end up using TKIs, prazapanic or sunitinib. Though we counsel for intermediate and poor risk for immunotherapy plus TKI combination, but I think in my practice, at least, most of the patients, they end up using TKIs alone. And in that also, prazapanic is the most common one.
Put a number to that. How many percentage of your patients would end up on first line IO, either singlet, doublet, or IO TKI? Just give a number.
So, 20% at the max.
20%. That even I would say that's also very encouraging. Do you have any formula to see in which one you would want? Is there a way you would go about? I have put some ideas how you can consider nivo-ipi or a pembro-axitinib in front of you. What is your practical note on how you want to go about negotiating?
So, sir, ipilimumab I have never used, and I don't think it's available to us. So, for all practical purposes, what counseling I do is for pembro and axitinib. And the choice of the therapy, the discussion is mainly for using pembro plus axi versus prazapanic or supreme. And most of the patients, owing to the financial cost or the availability, most of them end up using prazapanic alone. In the first line.
Fine. So we had a patient, and that patient, went on to be on sunitinib. First line is on sunitinib for the past 4 years. So I have a dilemma: how long to continue and all that one. That's fine. That's at least a good dilemma. We leave it there. I'll try to cover some of the second line options here. And Dr. Chitresh, since you joined later, I have a second patient who is a 66-year-old patient who is in a good performance status and metastatic RCC on sunitinib, and in 2017, late 2017, presents with the disease progression. And so in patients on sunitinib, when they are disease progression, today in your setting, what are your choices, Dr. Jitresh?
So for any patient who is progressing on oral TKI like sunitinib in first line, I tend to offer immunotherapy in the second line. So,
okay, so what choice of immunotherapy?
so most of my patients are even nivolumab single agent is the most common drug.
Perfect. So we did something like that, but that was in 2017 July. This is one of the earliest patients on nivolumab. This as when the nivolumab arrived, and you have answered the question, and the patient showed excellent response on nivolumab, and I would say that the patient is now 4 years crossed, 3.5, 4 years still on nivolumab. Excellent response. So that really makes us convinced that this is true, and that happens in Indian patients, and that's how the whole data set is convincing, and that's why we have now started to believe in how to negotiate your conversations with the patient. But then comes the setting, you have got a TKI good, you've got a nivolumab good, but then eventually all patients do progress. So my question now is turning to what do we do in patients who are going to progress beyond these known lines? Let me come back to Chandan. Chandan, you have sunitinib, you have nivolumab, whatever, and then the patient, these are the subsequent line choices for the clear cell histology. Just on a quick note, cabozantinib is a possibility, and then ipi-nivo is a possibility, and then we have other things like axitinib and lenvo combo and all. And these data sets capture the various options in patients who are on post TKI. So I will give you an option now in a patient whom we had a patient who was diagnosed in 2017 on sunitinib, and up till metastatic disease 3 to 4 years on sunitinib, and at the end of 4th year, long duration of response to sunitinib, and doing well, but then eventually progresses. Now, so what do we do, Chandan? A long responder on sunitinib progresses. What are the choices?
The post TKI progression, I have the descent order. I always use the nivolumab, lenvatinib, everolimus, axitinib, and last is everolimus. So if patient is really good and there is no problem, I will use nivolumab. The second option is lenvatinib and everolimus. I will cancel this may cause mucositis and other side effects, definitely more than the nivolumab, but the outcome is equal to nivolumab, almost equal to nivolumab. If both things are not available, then I will go for axitinib, which is give me around 15 months of OS. And if it's nothing available, I'll go for the everolimus, it's around 6.
So I have talked to you in September 2019. Imagine that, and I have put this patient on axitinib, and as you rightly said, very useful response to axitinib, and we had a PFS of about 6 to 7, 8 months, and nearly now more than 12 months have gone with axitinib. The patient is still going on, but then I'm giving you another patient whom I have already exhausted axitinib. I have patients who have progressed on axitinib, and this is again a long runner. He was diagnosed in 2013 and then went on to be on sunitinib and was axitinib more than a year on axitinib and have progressed. So I can come to Chitresh. I'm giving you, and this is a real patient who has progressed on axitinib. And this happened in 2016, so that context is 2016-17. So Chitresh, your choice.
Immunotherapy has been given to her or not? Sir, immunotherapy has been given to her or not till now?
In 2016, we didn't have.
2016. Okay. So she was treated only with axitinib?
And sunitinib, axitinib.
Sunitinib, axitinib. So then, sir, the everolimus, and one option is everolimus in this case.
No problem. We put this patient on cabozantinib. That was the best use at that time. We could get cabozantinib.